Let's go to the next slide. All right, and this would be slide 11. I've spoken about most of this already. If you want to look at the participants, that would be listed under people on that last slide up in the upper left-hand corner. You can see the different participants in the course. You can review the activities also on the left-hand side. If you want to add a resource or check out resources and activities, that's something that we'll spend some time looking at after we finish the course design. But just so you're familiar with it, when you turn editing on, about 2/3 of the way down the page, it will say add a resource, and if you were to click on that, it's a pull down menu. You'll see add a file, link to a web page, and so on. That is where we will be adding the resources for your course. And then the other side are where we would add activities, and those activities are Moodle specific. That is, we can add some different features. So for instance, right now we've got choice and forum and feedback, lesson, quiz, and so on. Those are the different activities which you'll become familiar with in the second part of the class. All right, time for another transition. We're now going to move into essential questions, and this is really where I want you to work the first week, is in the area of essential questions. And if you look at your course design wiki, that's the first element where there's some work for you to do. When you get into your course wiki, you will be working on that left-hand most column. That is where you want to add your own materials about your own course. The middle column gives you a description of what we're looking for, and then the right-hand most column will provide a variety of examples for you to use, examples from other courses either in the JVLA or outside of it. All right, when we're looking at essential questions, we're now on slide 13. We're looking at the big picture. Instead of looking at specific trees, we're looking at the forest. When someone might ask you, 10 years from now, what this course was about, you can describe it in maybe 2 or 3 sentences. Well, that's kind of the same thing we want to look at in terms of the essential questions. What are those particular elements which are most important to the course? We want to have you come up with 2 to 4 different essential questions, no more than 4 certainly. And again, with these essential questions, again, you're looking at those enduring understandings. And it may be something that's kind of difficult to look at also. For instance, if we go to the next slide, slide 14, once again, we're dealing with the top levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And I know you can't get through education without looking at Bloom, and that is those categories of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Again, it's the purpose is to spark curiosity and wonder. So, for instance, in my own course on the American Dream Deferred, one of my essential questions is, what is the American Dream? Well, there are a lot of people who have some agreement on it, but then there are others who disagree with various instances of it. For instance, in the same way, if we were to have a discussion now about what makes a good marriage, I'm sure we could come to some understanding about that, but some people would emphasize some sections, others other sections as well. So it could be your essential question has got to be not a question that's easily answered. If it is a question that's easily answered, it's probably in the procedural knowledge or factual knowledge, which we'll see a little bit later in this presentation. One of the things that I also want to talk to is that it connects with real-life situations and kind of cross-disciplinary as well. One of the keys here that we want to do is try to set up a cognitive apprenticeship for students. That is, let's say that you're teaching a course in music. How does a musician approach this piece of music? Well, certainly very differently than a novice, would approach it in some ways. So think about your own expertise and how we might develop that for our own students. In likewise fashion, let's say that I'm someone in literature. How do I approach literary criticism in a way that a novice might not be able to? with essential questions, again, I would urge you to go back when you have time and look at both the description and then the examples of essential questions. I think you'll see some good examples, and you'll find this to be pretty easy sledding as far as answering these. If you have questions, though, don't hesitate to write me about them also. Now, that's going to be our main object of study the first week. When we get back on that first Saturday in February, I'm going to have you type in a little essential question in the public chat on DimDim, and then we'll spend a little bit of time going over those also. Now let's move to slide number 16, which talks about knowledge categories. Philosophers can divide knowledge in any variety of ways. For the purposes of our course, we're going to divide knowledge into 3 different categories. And again, this is with an eye toward that cognitive apprenticeship model. So we're going to divide knowledge into strategic knowledge, procedural knowledge, and factual knowledge. Moving on to strategic knowledge on slide 18. Again, this is the most important of the categories, and as such, it's probably the most difficult to discuss. Again, the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and again, think about, what are those, we talked about essential questions, those enduring understandings. Well, how do we get there in some ways? What I want you to think about and try to promote with students is to try to get them to be metacognitive, or be able to think about their own thinking in some way. So we want to examine the complex formulas that someone within our own specific discipline might use. We also want, there's also that idea, and Daggett talks about this nicely. He's, of course, the head of the International Center for Leadership of Education, about rigor and relevance in education. But it's also being able to help students not only deal with predictable situations, but also unpredictable situations, which they'll definitely encounter in the world. Go to our next slide, slide 19. So here are some questions to consider when thinking about strategies. What complex strategies do you want students to develop within the course? How will they go about, again, being metacognitive about their own thinking? We talked about you as the expert. Well, how do we promote that same sort of cognitive expertise within students themselves? Also, that last bullet about becoming men and women for others, this is where we get to the Jesuit-specific nature of the course. And you can see that the course has been set up by way of the IPP, or Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, where we have foundation, context, reflection, action. Excuse me. So we proceed by that, but also within a larger picture, we want to be able to speak to how we are becoming men and women for others, which is, of course, a line uttered by the Jesuit general Pedro Rupe in 1973 when he talked about being men for others.